everybody. I'm Matt Valley. Welcome to the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and insights pros that you trust. Super excited today to welcome Leigh Kessler from Potomac, Maryland, to the podcast today. Hey, Leigh. Now, Leigh works at a really cool and innovative company called Mercury Analytics. And Mercury Analytics has developed lots of cool research technology that they apply to their work in polling and media and comms research and all kinds of cool stuff on behalf of their clients. So check them out, really cool. But if Leigh looks vaguely familiar, it's quite possible you've seen him before while you're channel surfing. So maybe you saw him on the Daily Buzz one time late at night kind of thing. Maybe Showbiz Tonight, or perhaps on the classic VH1's The Best Week Ever, which I know all of us watched in the early aughts. And Leigh did his time on that show, so it's really cool. Maybe you even saw him at your local comedy club. Who knows? But point is, yes, he was a professional comedian before getting into research. How do you connect those dots? Who knows? Only Leigh does, but he's going to share it with us today. So welcome to the show, Leigh.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Good to be here.
Yeah, super happy to have you here. I've seen some of your stuff. You're absolutely hilarious, right? So really cool. But I like to start with research. So tell us your story. How'd you find your way into this whole market research insight space?
Well, it starts with that my goal in life was always that to do what I loved. That I wanted. That was the lesson I got from my parents was you've got to do what you love. And when I first started, it was stand up. And as I got older and things changed and I was making career decisions, I went on a new path. All right, where is that love? Started in advertising. I was a copywriter at an ad agency, which I didn't really love. I liked it, but to me, copywriting was like joke writing, but it wasn't about big ideas. It wasn't about insights that drive something. So when I found the brand strategy side, that's when I started thinking, okay, there's something here for me. And we were doing IDIs and I was like, all right, this is really kind of cool how we're interviewing people. Went to work at a bigger agency as an account supervisor for Tums, which a major American iconic brand.
Sure.
And that's the first time I ever saw.
I'm sorry.
Exactly. You might have to pay somebody now. You might have to pay a royalty. It's up to you. But it was the first time I saw focus groups and I just fell in love with it. And I watched it and I was like, this guy doing these, I was like, I'd be so good at this. So when I had unfortunately gotten let go from the agency, needed to find something to do, which was 3 weeks, by the way, after the birth of my first daughter, I reached out to a guy I knew who had a business doing focus groups and doing research. And I said, hey, I'm looking for work. I think I'd be great at this. I'd love to do it. And he was like, I think you'd be great at it too. And he brought me in. And that's how I first got into moderating. I got very lucky with people along the way who gave me chances and turned it into a career. First for doing it on my own. And then, I would get hired by companies as a freelance independent. Then took a little break as I got into the world of a project that I was doing that started as IDIs, became hey, would you help us with the strategy? Became, hey, would you come be our VP of marketing? And that was an 8-year engagement that got me away from research, unfortunately. But I've been back in it for almost 2 years and I love it. I love research. I love people in research. I love people who do research. I love people who participate in research. I love this idea that there's an entire business based on just asking people what they think about stuff and knowing it's important.
Yeah, it's really neat because I can see the link with comedy and the observation that good comedy requires, the observation of the world and people. But speaking of great people in research, we know each other because you spoke at the QRCA conference, right? And my colleague at Market Vision, Becky Schultz, said, "Oh, you got to talk to this guy, Leigh Kessler." So here we are. I'm very excited about that. But let's tell us. So you mentioned that comedy is your first love. So how did that come about? And tell us a little bit about your career and maybe some of your favorite gigs.
Sure. Well, so I first fell in love with stand up with Billy Crystal, because I could do uh he did him right. He did impressions, and he would do Fernando, and he'd do Sammy Davis Jr. And I could do those impressions, and I would make people laugh, and I made adults laugh. So when I fell in love with comedy, it wasn't because I was like a class clown or a goof off. It was that I loved making people laugh, and I did it with an apparent talent, right? The ability
Right.
to do impressions. And so I knew there was something special there. And that's where I fell in love with this idea of being a comedic performer. The stand up, the person who, and I studied it after that, and I would watch evening on, evening at the Improv, comedy on the road. You're a music guy, like a lot, your formative years were spent listening to music, obsessed with music. Mine
So,
was an obsession with stand up, and anywhere
yeah,
I could get my hands on it, that's what I wanted to watch. So the first major influence for me was George Carlin.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the reason being, like, if you now, if you wanted to watch an hour of comedy now, it's not hard. There's tons of places, but it used to be the only place you could watch an hour of comedy on TV was HBO, when the comedian would do a big thing. And that's where I first saw George Carlin, and I was like,
right.
this guy is amazing. um and I love that he was talking about these really big ideas, and then I love that he was talking about these tiny ideas.
Right.
um, so that was a big influence on me. The next biggest influence was Seinfeld.
Ah,
And
yes,
when
yes.
I first saw him, and I was like, watching the show Seinfeld, I watched it from the very beginning, and people always say, it's a show about nothing, but it wasn't. It was a show about where a comedian gets his material.
Right.
And I loved, so I would watch it being like, oh my God, this is like class for me. Like, something
Yeah.
happens to him, he then goes and writes about it. So that was a big part of my trajectory. Those three were the most influential on me.
Sure.
And what I have since realized is that, again, Crystal was about this talent. Seinfeld and Carlin were about this world of observational comedy.
Right.
And I realized that as I loved the stand-up part, but I think I loved the observation as much as anything else.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
loved this idea that these guys were getting paid to notice things and then tell you about them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's why when I found qualitative research, I was like, it's kind of 50% of the thing I love.
Yeah.
And then when you factor in other things like the live performance, I love being in the room of 8 people. I love controlling the table, the conversation. I
Yeah.
love being important. Like when you walk into a facility and they're like, oh, the moderator, oh, you're the moderator. The moderator's here.
Yeah.
Oh, send the moderator to the back room. And it's a lot like being a
Yeah.
facility comedian.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
so that's kind of where it started. And I'm so happy I found it.
Now, how did you first get your break? Because I mean, you did have some really good TV gigs in addition to slugging it out in the clubs.
Yeah. So I was always obsessed with stand up. A lot of obviously when I graduated from college and I knew that's what I wanted to do, I lived in LA for about a year. Then I moved to New York. And the reason being, I obviously wanted to get famous and I wanted to be on TV. I wanted to have a sitcom and be in movies, right? You want all that celebrity stuff.
Right.
I love the art form of stand up. And so New York to me was a better place if that's what you're focused on. LA is the television world. New York is about the arts and
Right.
becoming an artist.
Mhm.
And so I got to, you start out doing open mics and bringer shows. I mean, how many of my friends who were right out of college making like, less than $20,000 a year and were buying 2 drinks at comedy clubs so that they could come see me and,
Yeah.
spending their money on supporting me. And that's how you get started. And you just need stage time and you need to bomb and you need to fail and you got to get up wherever anybody would have you. And then
Yeah.
you put together 5 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 15 and somebody hires you and just keep working
Yeah.
and eventually enough you work in networks and people talking and somebody gives you an opportunity, and once you get one opportunity it kind of turns into more.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was a great ride.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and obviously shares a lot in common with doing the band thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Slugging it out, playing like the worst gigs possible. And I've got plenty of stories about that. But
Yeah.
I'm curious to know. So you mentioned some of your influences. Are there any comedians that are really active today that you have a lot of respect for? I'm sure there are, but who comes to mind?
Well, I think when I look at like the past 20 years, Chappelle is just,
Yeah,
and obviously that's a loaded statement just because there's so many people now who understandably find what he does offensive.
right,
Um, but what he did prior to that was so breakthrough. And his love of stand-up and the art of stand-up and the way that he was telling a story about his life, yet he was connecting with audiences that were nothing like him.
right.
And what he had there is just, to me, phenomenal. He is a, a he's a true brain,
Yeah,
analyzing the world. And sometimes we don't like what he's saying, and I get that. But he is someone who's just truly analyzing the world. And Chris Rock,
yeah,
I mean, those are the two people that if something happens in the world, like I want to hear their take on it.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
that's what they are for me. The lesser known, but the person that I find most amazing, who when I watch, I'm like, this is exactly why I'm not in comedy anymore, because I think he's such a genius, is Anthony Jeselnik.
okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen him. He
I've
pops
probably
up a
seen
lot
him, but
now.
don't. What's that?
He pops up on things and you'd be like, oh, I didn't realize that was the guy.
Yeah,
He is doing something in stand-up that I have never seen before. As somebody who's studied it as long as I have, he's
sure.
doing something somebody you've never seen. And what that is I'll give it away if anybody watches him or knows him. Comedians are they're looking for a validation. They're looking to be loved. And when you see a comedian doing his act, he's high energy and he looks at you and he says the line and he's waiting for you to laugh. Says the punch, waiting for you to laugh. Says the
Right.
punch, wants the laugh. And what Anthony Jeselnik does is he lives in the silence.
Oh,
And it is so confident and it is so hard. Like I've just never seen comedians do it. And he's very absurdist and dark and bleak, which is not me or my style.
yeah,
But I just find that he is able to let silence resonate in the room, and
yeah.
yet it's voluminous.
Oh,
And so that's what I find
crazy.
amazing.
Yeah, for most people, that'd be way too much of a risk to even
It's
take.
such a
I
risk,
mean, yeah, wow.
such a risk.
All right, Anthony Jeselnik,
And
I'll check that out.
yeah, no, and if you find him offensive, I mean nothing intentional by it,
Yeah,
uh,
it's about
but
the
he,
craft, right? So,
it's just watch that he is doing something that most comedians just cannot do, and it's amazing to watch. I don't know if it's the future. I don't think it's the future. I think he's just that different and original.
yeah, yeah, cool. All right, so you mentioned, and it makes total sense. This notion of observation is something that is parallel when it comes to stand up and moderating and research. Is there anything else that any other lessons or skills or whatever that you've taken from your stand up days that you've applied to your career in research?
Well, I think one of the things that is hardest when you're first starting to get into moderating, and that young moderators, new moderators, even older moderators are challenged by, is controlling the room.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
idea of, you've got somebody who's just kind of, they keep talking and they're kind of throwing everything off. And that is the hardest thing I think for young moderators to get over. And for me, I'd been dealing with drunk crowds for so long that
Yeah.
that was easy. Um, there was no fear in like controlling the room. And I'm a nice person and my act was nice. So I knew how to do it in a positive way, but I
Sure.
was not I would never get steamrolled by somebody in a focus group. So I think that was a big part of it. Um, part of stand-up is over time, in any performance, people are scared of public speaking. Eventually it slows down. So like when I'm public speaking now, if I'm in front of the QRCA was maybe 300 some people, it's in real time for me. Whereas when I first started, it's going 1,000 miles per hour. And that's what happens to most of us. A focus group could feel the same way. And again, I didn't really have that as much because I was just comfortable not only speaking in front of a room, but bearing the responsibility of how this was all going to go.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's what made it. That's what I brought to it.
Yeah, cool, cool. All right, so now that you've been in the research world for a while, you've gotten acclimated. You're a veteran, dare I say. So from where you sit, as you're looking at the future of research, so much of the world has changed. What do you see?
Um, it's hard to say because of what has happened in the past 6 months, right? With this sort of this use of AI. What does it mean?
Yeah,
And how's it going to influence things? I don't know. But what I would say is that, like, being as a music analogy, you can create music online and you can digitize and you can do a lot of stuff to
yeah,
create music. And you can create music, and there's millions of songs already out there, and yet you can use those things and create music, and music is still getting created. And live music, you don't
yeah,
have to use technology tools. Just an acoustic guitar, drums, a live bass, like that still exists. So when I look at where research is
yeah,
going, where we don't know, I just I don't think there's ever been something where digital or technology has replaced what human brings to something. Um, and I think it just makes it easier to talk to people and ask questions. But
yeah,
we're still gonna, qualitative is still about recognizing the human experience.
yes.
And I think that will always be analog in some way.
Yeah, I love that answer, because I love the tie to music because I think that there's a lot of truth in that. There's some music that is now purely digital, right? Of course, but the role in a lot of music that technology has played has just made it more accessible and easier to produce, easier to record. But it's still about the magic of the performance,
Right.
the creativity of songwriting, and that part's great. And so, with that said, I'm going to take a little jog aside here because I know that you've established kind of a late in life hobby around music, which of course is
Yeah.
appropriate for this podcast. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I got into it. It's funny, kind of right before COVID. It was that October of 2019.
Yeah.
My my daughter's my daughter, who was at the time, I guess about 11, was played lacrosse. I'm standing on the
Okay.
sidelines talking to one of the moms whose kid is playing, whose husband happened to be the coach of their lacrosse team. And
Okay.
she was telling me that he plays music, him and his friends, they all get together on like Friday afternoons and they do jams. And I was like, oh my God, I'd love to just come sit and listen. So she was like, oh, anytime. So I went over one Friday afternoon and they were all sitting outside and just playing acoustic, jamming together. I was like, this is amazing. And so the guy says, well, what do you play, or do you do anything? I said, no, I not. He's like, can you sing? I was like, well, I don't think so, but I could probably fake it. And we did a song. He said, well, what song do you want to do? And I did Ripple by the Grateful Dead. And
Okay.
which is just a great acoustic campfire song. And I sang it and they played along and I was like, this is amazing. And we were done. He was like, all right, what song do you want to do next? And I was like, Are you serious? Like, you guys just want me to, they're like, yeah, sing. And I couldn't believe it. So it was like live karaoke. It started, this was sort of the late afternoon. It started getting, it's October, it starts getting colder. So they're like, why don't we go downstairs? We go downstairs and he's got a whole studio and it's amps and electric equipment. There's a drum set. And it was like, oh my God, exactly your background. I walked into that room and um and I sang and I grabbed the mic and he had everything on the screen and I pulled the mic and it was like, oh, this feels so good. I love a microphone in my hand. So that's kind of what kicked it off. And he kept on inviting me back. And I had a lot to learn, but the one thing I know from stand-up is that if you're going to perform or do something, don't hold back, right? Like, give it, mess up by putting too much into it. Because if you hold back, it's not fun for anybody. And
Totally
so
true. Yes.
I think despite my lack of knowledge of what we were doing, I was able to do that. I'm not a great singer, but I'm a good, again, I did impressions. So I can sound like something. The hardest part, and this is now 3 years later, and it got me through COVID, and that was my pod. And the hardest part, and it's the hardest part in anything, it's what I talk about in stand-up, it's the hardest part for stand-ups, is finding your voice.
Yeah.
Right. And every artist has to find their voice, but that term comes literally from music, which is, how do I sound like me and not sound like I'm doing an impression of Darius Rucker or Bon Jovi, right? How do I actually create music by singing it? And that has been a lot more of a journey than I ever realized, but it's been awesome.
There is such an important lesson that you shared there, which is, and it applies to research too, because a lot of times, and we're just going through this, we're talking about at Market Vision, we're talking about pain points that clients express, right? And so we had actually done this work on jobs to be done of our clients. We did our own, internal research project about it. And it's the constant thing where our suppliers don't go far enough. They are too timid in their recommendations. They don't trust themselves. It's like you got to really throw yourself out there and take a chance and start a conversation rather than hold way back and try not to make any waves. The only way you can really get better and really add insight is to really go for it. That applies to research and music. So
yeah, and that is a takeaway from stand-up, which is that I don't like to bomb, but I don't have a fear of going somewhere where I might bomb.
Yeah.
Right. And that's that point, is you're better. And especially the beauty is with research and the tools we have, like, you can get answers. So even if I bomb, I can find out why. I can listen to what people say and give me feedback about that. And the worst thing you can do is do that and not record. Like, I record everything I ever do. Every time we do music, like, I record it, because that's how you learn and go back and hear it.
Yes.
But yeah, don't be afraid, but also don't waste the opportunity to learn from it. Is a big part.
100%. I realized that, like, recently playing gigs here in Dallas. It's like, oh, we're walking into a bad one here. This one's not going to go well. And we go, and sure enough, we bomb and the gig sucks. But you change your mind frame and say, what am I going to learn from this? What are we not going to do next time so that this doesn't happen? And why did I feel this in my guts to begin with? Right. So anyway, all good stuff. So
and when it happens, I mark it off as like, all right, I got one out of the way. Right? Like,
totally.
I got it out of the way. So the next one I'm probably not going to, because I spent it on this one.
Totally. And for me, I've mentioned this Facebook site before on this podcast, but there's a great site called Gigs from Hell, right? Which has made everything so much better for me, because then it's like, I almost want to make sure that I have some really awful gigs so I can post them on Gigs from Hell and everybody can laugh and commiserate about it. But
Right. And that's an example of qualitative research, right? If it happens to one person, it probably has happened to 5,000 other people. And that's that's the story. I will say that the most interesting thing in this journey that I've gone through with music and being in a band is that
yeah,
as a stand-up, it's all you. I wrote it, I performed it. I didn't have to ask permission. I didn't have to wait for other people to do anything. You
yeah,
are you're a live scared animal, but it all falls on you.
right,
And being in a band, I would say has my my improv comedy experience has come in because I already knew how to listen and I already knew that other people brought value to what
yeah,
we were creating and I didn't have to do it the entire time. So that has been a journey to learn how to um, quarterback, right? The connection I've really, because in high school I played football and I was a quarterback, and what I loved, and I wasn't incredibly talented, but I loved how the game runs through you, and the job of the quarterback is to know what everyone is doing, and
sure,
sometimes you're thrown out to that guy and he does it. Sometimes you hand it to this guy, he does it,
yeah,
and that's music. Is as the front man is being in front and being
yeah,
like, sometimes I got to give it to my lead guitarist, sometimes I want my keyboards to do it, but I have to make sure we're all working together. And that is not stand up. So it's been
yeah.
really fun to exercise that.
Yeah, as someone sitting in the back, I learned a long time ago to blame the lead guitarist, and then and then everything's fine. So it's never my fault. I know that much.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay. All right. So Leigh, you're a busy person, but you're also an observer of the world. We all are very choiceful in terms, well, ideally, or we think we are choiceful in terms of the media that we choose to consume. I'm curious to know what you're turning to these days for insight, inspiration, or enjoyment.
Good question. I find that when I turn on the television, I go to The Office, and if The Office is on, that's what I'm going to watch. So I watch The Office episode after episode because Comedy Central has just become like the Office channel.
Yeah.
Um, and I watch it and I laugh at it and I love it. And I think to myself, why am I only watching The Office? Like, what is the psychology going on that is making me do this every single time I put on the television? Um, I don't know what it is, but I'm a news guy more than anything. I've
Sure.
never been into fantasy because I think I've always been obsessed with reality, right? Observation. I've never tried to live in a fantasy world. It's been fascination with the world we live in. And I
Sure.
think that drives my interest in media. Um, so podcasts like This American Life, I love because it's like qualitative research. Like
Yeah.
one story about one person is so universal and educational.
Sure.
Uh, and then to be honest, like most of the time when I'm in the car by myself, I karaoke.
Me
And I
too.
whatever song we're working on in the band, I
Yeah.
put it on, like I go to YouTube and I find the karaoke version of the song and I just drive and sing and work on the song
Yeah.
and I love it. So like that's where my media is right now.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Cool. So let's stick on music here because we're getting to my favorite and last question. But a couple things I need to say beforehand. First of all, this is you alluded to it. This is my rehearsal space. My wife didn't want me in the house today. There's nothing serious there, but this is my rehearsal space. I work out of here sometimes, but that's my drum kit, not my
Nice.
virtual half stack. So I just want to say that. Couple other things I have to thank my good buddy Wayne Kokritz. He visited me from Knoxville, Tennessee, where he just moved not just a few years ago. And he said, "Hey, is there anything you want me to bring?" I said, "Bring me some merch from Knoxville, man. I love merch." And so he sent me this little Dolly Parton, some local
Yeah.
flavor, which is cool. Also,
Love
Leigh, I need to let you know that, of course, anybody who's on the podcast, it's not rock and roll without merch. So I just dropped this in the mail for you today. It looks just like this.
I love it.
A couple stickers too.
I love
Um,
it. Wearing with pride.
but anyway, okay, let's get to it. So this is what I really want to know, Leigh, and I'm super curious because you started performing music later in life, but obviously music, everybody loves music. So let's say you're stranded on a desert island, right? You have three records, and it doesn't have to be music, actually, it can be comedy. That's actually happened before. Somebody's answered that way. But anyway, you've got three records of your choosing to keep you company for the rest of your days on a stranded island. What are your three choices?
So, so first, I'm a country music guy. I
Yeah.
love country music, and I've always loved
Okay.
country. Which I've realized has to do with like stand-up comedy. I mean, country music tends to be storytelling, and it
Yeah.
tends to be very creative wordplay.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and so you talk about Knoxville and Dolly. So I am a huge country fan. That's what I listen to most. Um, uh, if I had three albums, the first would be it's a Grateful Dead live album. I don't know which one, but it would be one that just has like all of the stuff I would love to hear
Yeah.
for the rest of my life. So definitely be Live Dead show. The second would be John Prine. Uh,
Oh, yes. You know what? I did a John Prine cover with some old cats I used to play with in Minneapolis. A COVID pandemic version. I'll send it to you afterward. But anyway, yeah, I love John Prine. Go ahead.
what song did you cover?
We did what's the I am an old woman.
Angel from Montgomery.
Angel from Montgomery. There you go. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll send that to you.
amazing.
It's really a
Yeah.
wonderful version. So anyway,
Oh,
go ahead.
it's gotten very famous, but I mean, I've loved John Prine since I was in high school, and an older guy introduced me to him, and I've loved him since. So he has a live album. It was the first John Prine album I ever heard,
Yeah.
and it's a long one, so that's the one I would take. And the third would be a comedy album, and it would be it'd be Stephen Wright's "I Have a Pony."
I have that album, dude. I've listened to it, I don't hundreds of times.
Yeah, it would be
Yes.
because I thought about it and I was like, well, comedy album, which is the comedy album? And I feel like there's two elements of that album. It's the absurdist. And I
Yes.
feel like if I was on a desert island, I wouldn't want really to laugh at like the same observations all the time that like you might get from other comedians or stories. I would just want absurdist stuff. So my brain was constantly thinking about absurdist stuff.
Totally.
Um,
Uh,
and I
Bucky Goldstein is what I remember.
Bucky Goldstein.
Just classic.
It's a small world, but I wouldn't want to have to paint it. I love it. But the thing about all those albums, and as I was playing in my head, like what were the ones that I would listen to? It was all live albums. My
Yeah.
choices were all live albums. And I realized like if I was on a deserted island, I
Yeah.
would miss the sound of other people
Yes.
and
Yes.
clapping and having a good time. And
Yeah.
that's what I would want to get out of that more than music. Because if I really wanted to play music, maybe I could take reeds and create something. Maybe I could create clam shells. I could
Sure.
make music,
Sure.
but nothing would create the sound of people having a good time. And I love that
Yes.
in an album.
That is a tremendous insight. Cool. I love your choices. I really do. And this has been a great chat. I'm so glad we had a chance to get together and chat, and hopefully next time it'll be over a pint or maybe a cup of coffee somewhere. So let's definitely keep the conversation going. Let's talk soon, Leigh, and you know how it goes. Let's rock and roll.